Right. So, first of all, let me just start by asking you what's going on in Sweden at the moment, because we are listening to news that say that there are several bombings in the
And
country. And
it's not good, and
okay,
it's I at the moment I don't see any hope for improvements either. It's sort of the perfect storm. Uh, um, as you may know, there's a bombing a day, and there's people being shot here and there, and it's it's a combination of, I would say, the world's silliest legal system introduced in the 1960s. So if you murder someone when you're 17 or 15 or so, then you get at maximum 4 years of um, closed youth care at might not even be a enclosed prison for you because you're a child. You have to, it's an illness to commit a crime. So you have to be, people have to be nice to you, and then you'll be good again because you're only a child. If you're under 15, nothing at all happens basically. And so a crime here, a brutal rape, could give you 2 years of that compared to 30 years in prison in France. That's the, and that was introduced in the 60s. And then we have the welfare state, so that people are, if they have lots of children and don't work, they get essentially more money than if they worked. And then mass migration, mass immigration, and you combine those, then you get what you get. Ah,
it
yeah,
it looks like this is basically late stage statism, where people are incentivized to not work, and those who do work are disrespected because they are somehow forced in order to procure welfare for those who are unproductive and sometimes downright hostile
in a
to
sense,
culture.
but if you compare to France, France, uh, the French have a rather cynical view of human nature. They don't trust people, whilst in Sweden, the official dogma is that everyone is nice, basically, and you can't be too harsh on them. After all, and I use scare quotes, they are small brown people, and then they are treated like children, even though they are mass murderers.
I'm not gonna lie, I remember some years ago I was reading a newspaper about Scandinavia and prisons especially, and they were showing prisons in Scandinavia, and they showed images that would remind people of really luxurious hotels, and they were
Exactly.
essentially saying that. So that wasn't an exaggeration. That
No,
wasn't
no,
fake
the
news.
prison, from this an article from 2014, Sweden had the most expensive prisons in Europe per prisoner, except for San Marino. But San Marino only had one prisoner, six, so it's 6 times the average in Sweden. And we have an extremely low incarceration rate. And if you look at data from 2004, I think it was, we have 3 times the criminality of the United States, for example. But uh, and now after that, a million and a half immigrants have arrived from culturally incompatible nations to a large degree.
Do you think that there are any reasons to be optimistic at the moment about Scandinavia and Sweden in particular?
I think you can be optimistic about Denmark and Finland. Finland, the Finns don't go for this being nice to people approach, and the Danes have really woken up. In Sweden, it's hopeless at the moment. There is no party in parliament that can do anything about it. And there's no party that can get into parliament either. I've heard you discuss on the Lotus Eaters proportional representation. But the most right wing you get then is Sunak, I would say. Mainly you have 80% Lib Dems and Labour. That's what you get in parliament. And no one else can get into.
So the question to ask there is, what has to happen for people of that persuasion to, in a sense, wake up? how more tragic events must happen for people to stop being so, let's say, ridiculously charitable about this.
I mean, it reminds me of Trump derangement syndrome, that people are, even though all the information in the world is available today, we have the internet. You can get to all the sources. You can watch any person in live, or what they said in an interview, or read about them. But people don't. So you have, I mean, we're supposed to have multiculturalism in Sweden, but it's like in Britain. You have enclaves of people living. They live sort of back to back to each other. They don't interact. Maybe those who work, you see them as bus drivers and nurses and so on and so forth, but people don't socialize after work. There's no reason for it. And I mean, there is this mathematical formula. I think Schelling's uh, law of segregation. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's an
No,
economy.
I will. If you don't mind, I'll type it. You said.
Schelling, I think SCH, Schelling. I mean, but basically, it says that you get segregation even though you don't need to have racism or hatred for each other. It's just that you have a bit of friction. Sort of people don't get along. It's maybe their kids are too loud, or it doesn't smell right, they're cooking or something like that. So people, one person after another, when they move, because people move, they move to an area where they are feel more comfortable. So even though there is no serious animosity, you get segregation. So you get islands of in Britain, Pakistan is here. You get Somalis, and you get uh, Sunni Arabs in one area, and so on and so forth. And they don't interact. So the people, those in power, it's like in Britain, I would say, those in power are a bit wealthier. They live in nice neighborhoods. They are not affected. So why would they care? Yeah.
Do you think that sometimes it's not just an issue of not being personally affected, but also an issue of ideology, and that is important here? I'll just give you an example that happened hours ago. Now, this interview is going to be uploaded
Yeah.
a few weeks from now, but today we had the tragic incident in Germany, in Munich, where
Mm.
an Afghan asylum seeker literally drove a car into a group of leftists. I think they're
Mm.
called the Verdi organization. And they instantly made an announcement that we're not going to talk, we don't want to give any room to far right racism.
Mm.
A car literally
I think
injured
it's
their.
there is people's self-perception is very important, and their beliefs are very important, and they are protected from intrusion. I remember, I can't find the article, but the 9/11, after 9/11, people came together in the United States. It was a terrible tragedy, but it took 6 months, 9 months before George Bush was the devil again, and corrupt and so on and so forth, according to the media. It's sort of as long as people don't get their house bombed, um, they don't shift opinions. So it's tragic.
And would you say that this suggests that there is a more or less fixed human nature, that the sort of narrative that destroys Europe and the West at the moment is trying to tell us does not exist? In other words, would you say,
Yeah,
for instance, that the law of segregation that you mentioned is something that is an inevitable, is supposed to be an inevitable outcome of human interaction?
I would say, yeah. Sort of to formulate my thoughts is, I think this Thomas Sowell's the vision of the anointed class. So I think Deirdre McCloskey calls them the clerisy. They form a tribe of their own, which is close to the outside, and they're happy. They go to the same dinner parties, and they speak to the same people, read the same newspapers. In Britain, they watch the BBC, and they're happy. They see a world that is okay, nothing, no problem here, and
I think we have the same in the UK, the same in Greece, and I think it's the same in every other Western country.
yeah.
It's exactly the class that you just said, as Thomas Sowell described them as the anointed. Who I think they have lost any kind of sentiment that is patriotic. They will say that they are patriots, but they do not understand patriotism as I would say it's traditionally understood. They seem to me to be very much viewing themselves as the enlightened ones.
There is a if I remember, Intellectuals in Society. If you read that book by Thomas Sowell, he talks about French intellectuals, and they were in the 1930s. They had survived the horrors of the First World War, and now they were citizens of the world, and they didn't want militarism and so on and so forth. And then France got invaded, and as he says, much to their credit, lots of them died in the resistance afterwards. But then they flipped, and that flipped their worldview. But we are peace damaged is a Swedish expression from 200 years of no wars in Sweden, but it's less than that, I would say. It's from 1970 that things turned really ugly here.
So you would say that ever since the 70s, the Sweden has been very much welfarist, and that's the main reason of
I
the
think
situation we see today.
what happened was that, well, it's a 20th century history. 1914, there were big demonstrations against the militarization and so forth. And suddenly, soon after, First World War came, and then in the middle of the 1917, I think Sweden could mobilize 600,000 well-trained soldiers, and there was a competition for a while between the Entente and the Central Powers, and they wanted Sweden to join because 600,000 men were important. And then came the eternal peace in 1918, and Sweden closed down half the defense in 1925 and continued demobilizing. So in 1936, it was decided to increase defense spending to 1.5% of GDP. And if I calculate correctly, in 1940, it went to 21%. And then it stayed about 20% during the whole war. So the class of politicians that were caught with their trousers down in 1940, really, when Denmark and Norway were occupied, they were in power until about 1970. Then they retired, and then there was a new era of perpetual peace that well that lot of politicians thought they were living in, and that's where we are now.
So I regularly see several socialist or socialist leaning people who upload articles about Scandinavia. And they say that the Scandinavian countries are the model of social democrat countries, and that they are the happiest countries to be alive. Now, I'm generally speaking, I'm not a doomer, and I don't want to advocate gloom or something, but would you
Mm.
say that this is far fetched, and that this is a sort of narrative that they are communicating in order to hide the sad realities that exist?
I don't think they're hiding anything. I mean, Sweden was a extremely homogeneous country
Okay.
where people and very conformist. Until 1850 in Sweden, most people lived in small villages where everyone knew everyone else and knew what they were doing. So people don't want to speak out, and they stick to themselves. It's I would say very hard to get to know Swedes, to get integrated in Sweden for a foreigner. So Swedes are not, and then we live in a corner of the world. We are not used to foreigners. I mean, you are Greek, you know that the Turks are different, the Bulgarians are different, the former Yugoslavians are different. They have, and Swedes think that everyone is the same, and the dream of everyone is to become a Swede. That is actual, I would say, a majority opinion in Sweden, that as soon as people arrive in Sweden, they see how great we are, and they want to become Swedish. It sounds silly to someone from middle of Central Europe, but that's a common opinion here.
If you would like to see the full version of this premium video, please head over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to gain full access to all of our premium content.